What's up, everyone? Welcome to The Heroic Ethic. I'm your host, Liberty Bill. So today I wanted to talk about something that is in the news lately, the Dave Chappelle comedy special. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the controversy. I've seen it all over the place and can't escape it, even though I try not to get too involved in pop culture and that sort of thing. And it was interesting to me because it's something that ties into my own core philosophy. Because both sides are wrong. And they're wrong because they don't understand the philosophical context in which they're speaking. And so to put my proposition up front, the left is right and the right is wrong, that words are violence, guys. Words are violence, which I'll explain here very shortly. But the left is wrong and the right is right in that none of that justifies any sort of cancel culture or severe repercussions for, committing violence with words in this particular instance. So that's the proposition that I'm about to support with this argument. So first, let me state that we need to get a proper definition of violence, or aggression is the word that I typically use, but, violence is close enough. Now, the problem with the word violence is that it typically is defined to be physical only, right? And so that's why they say words aren't violence, because they're coming to this, with this definition that violence means physical transgressions. That's a very common error, even from the libertarian perspective that I come from, or the libertarian tradition that I come from, because they don't have a sufficiently defined version or understanding of what violence is or what aggression is. They make this mistake that it has to be around property rights violations, physical transgressions. And that is clearly not the case. Words can be violence when they rise to a certain level. Fraud is words, yet that's clearly violence. Gaslighting, inciting riots, harassing someone to the point where they commit suicide. These are all, examples of words being violence, right? So people are like, oh, well, those are exceptions. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have exceptions when you're talking about categorical definitions. If there are exceptions, that means you haven't dialed in your definition properly enough. And so I will make the claim here that all violence boils down to are the imposition of psychic subjective costs, and that the exact same action is either an aggression or an aid based on the outcomes in terms of the subjective costs or benefits. So for example, if I shoved you to the ground and impose upon you the risk of hurting yourself or maybe actually hurting you, that would be aggression, right? Well, maybe. It is if it's unprovoked. But what if I'm pushing you out of the way of a speeding bus? Now all of a sudden that same action actually benefited you and is not aggression, right? Say, for example, I reach into your pocket and I drop a turd in there. Okay, that's violence. That's an aggression against your property rights. But what if I reach into your pocket and I stuff $100 in there? Did I aggress against you? Did I commit violence against you? Even though I transgressed your property rights, technically speaking? No. What if I were to destroy your cheap plastic ring that you got out of a box of Cracker Jack that has a value of less than a penny? Well, maybe that doesn't seem like it's a huge transgression. But what if now I have a bunch of psychic subjective valuations tied up into that? Maybe that was the ring that's the last memento of my dead father from the box of Cracker Jack from that baseball game that he took me to before he died. All of a sudden now losing that ring has a much more massive imposed costs on me, and I would be more justified to seek out a punishment, commensurate with that sort of psychic loss. So this idea that aggression and violence are always tied up in physical transgressions is just straight up wrong. And again, the libertarian tradition gets this wrong. They're very much tied up into this physical property rights transgressions thing. And as far as I can see out of the libertarian tradition, only J.C. Lester gets it right, where he admits, like I do, that no, it's actually about psychic subjective valuations and the granting of benefits versus the imposition of costs. So, the left is correct. Words are violence. It's just typically they don't rise to the level of legal action because of two problems, and this is where the left gets it wrong. The two major problems are when you're dealing with subjective psychic valuations, people can and will lie about them, right? Because they can see, oh, I can get a gain from this. So if, say, you accidentally bump someone on the stairwell as you're passing them in a crowded subway, they could say, oh my God, it hurts so bad, the pain. Oh, and now I'm traumatized, and I have all of these psychic subjective losses. You need to give me $5 million to make up for my subjective psychic losses. Well, there's literally no way to prove that. I mean, maybe, but I think we can probably agree that that's a little bit outlandish. And so, yeah, that's the first problem. People will lie and do lie about their subjective losses. And two, it ignores the fact that nothing ever occurs in isolation. It's always a choice between who loses more, right? So, for example, if I think that your face is ugly and it costs me a subjective valuation to look at it, it brings me down. Do I have the right to force you to wear a mask? Right? If your voice is annoying, do I have the right to force you to not speak? No, because everything we do as human beings comes with externalities. You can't even exist on this earth without creating an externality and reducing everybody else's subjective valuation simply because you take up space, and therefore they can't occupy that space, which is an infinitesimal reduction of their subjective values. So we have to realize that there's always a trade-off here, and we generally, should, to maximize human well-being, choose the one that offers the least harm and the most liberty. This is what I call the maximization of liberty principle. And so when it comes to this particular case where people are making the claim that words are violence, well, sure, technically they're true. But the proposed solution, canceling someone's job and their ability to earn income that supports their families and themselves, that's beyond the pale. To jail them for this when it's simply a matter of them exercising their freedom of speech and their freedom to make true statements, we have to make a trade-off. We have to look at it in terms of a trade-off. We can't simply say, well, words are violence, therefore any actions are justified in preventing this violence. Right? No, it's not. You are committing violence against me by showing me your ugly face. I don't have any right to force you to wear a mask, right? Because in the larger scheme of things, you are much more inhibited. You are much less free. You pay much higher costs for wearing that mask simply to satisfy my subjective claims that it bothers me so much that the overall social utility is greater if you wear a mask. Because even though it's inconvenient to you, it's way more inconvenient to me that I have to see your face, right? And you have to take my word on that. That doesn't make any sense to me either. Oh, one quick little edit to add a point that I forgot to make in the first take. The reason that we have a thing called manners is precisely to address this difficult problem, right? Where words are violence, but we can't trust the word of the victims because they're going to try and lie to make gains. And it ignores the fact that we exist in a context where there's always violence on one side. It's about minimizing the imposed psychic costs and maximizing the liberty, is that, yeah, we recognize that saying the wrong thing and hurting people's feelings is a bad thing, right? We just can't legally impose restrictions on that. So we do it socially. We do it socially through a thing called manners, right? That's the whole point of why manners developed, was so that it would socially punish people who would hurt feelings and say hurtful things, because yes, words are violence, but in a way that minimizes their ability to lie and inflict even greater violence through those lies. So that's where I stand on this whole Dave Chappelle thing. The left is right that, okay, maybe his words are violence against them, but it's in the context, and it's, he states this in the special, it's himself, it's in the context of the freedoms of the transgendered versus the freedom of Black people, which are the people that Dave Chappelle represents and champions, right? So, for them to state that, well, words are violence, so therefore any actions are justified in preventing this violence, is incorrect, because those actions themselves are violence. And so when you have, two options and neither of them are perfect, you always go for the most perfect or the least imperfect. And so that's about it. That's a very technical, philosophical point that we don't have a consistent and coherent understanding of what aggression even means. This is a core problem in the current libertarian tradition, and it's a huge problem on both the left and the right. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Feel free to ask any questions, because I know that this is an unusual perspective. It's practically unique, but I think it's correct, and I will be happy to defend it. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been The Heroic Ethic. I'm your host, Liberty Bill. See you next time.